My name is Africa.
Ah, that means you're from the womb. Yeah, that's what Africa means, you know. It means, it means to come from the source, from humanity, the birth.
I learn every day. So, just a comment. I had heard this before, after reading Pedagogy of the Oppressed, that Freire wrote the book, and then just after he had finished the book, he got Rachel of the Earth, and then after that, he revised the book. And after some of the ideas that you've talked about now, I kind of see how, where Fanon influenced Freire's thinking, particularly about the teacher-student and the student-teacher, as Freire put it. And the question is on ontology, or rather the ontological difference. I read a paper by Maldonado Torres, which is a bit challenging for me, where he explains the coloniality of being. It was a very early paper in 2007. So there he talks about Heidegger's ontological difference, Levinas' trans-ontological difference, and Fanon's sub-ontological difference. And you mentioned that the human is not an ontological identity, right? And I would just like your thoughts on the question of the sub-ontological difference, as to what did Fanon say about it, and how does it differ from Heidegger's ontological difference?
Keep going. As we say, don't be shy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Faye.
Hello, Faye.
I'm a knowledge addict. Thank you so much for your presentation today. I learned a lot of stuff. And reflecting on what I'm learning away from this and how I'm tying them together, that's what I'd like to comment on, and then I'll leave it on wanting more of your thoughts on a specific part of it. So I'm currently learning about learning environments, and the 4 categories that I've been exposed to is the hierarchical individual assessment, then distributed individual assessment. I don't want to go through all of them because I can't remember all the names right now, but the one that's really reflected today is this hierarchical individual assessment, where how we learn, what counts as knowledge, when we learn, for how long we learn, and who are authorities of knowledge, come from this trickle-down effect of the hierarchical individual mode of learning. And then when we figure out, like, okay, so then what is learning and how can I exhibit that I've learned something, would be for me to parrot out or to paraphrase what I've learned from this hierarchical stream of knowledge. And it seems that you are promoting, and I agree with this, a disruption of that space where we're having a distributed, where everyone becomes a teacher. And then what makes me think is that, what it's making me think of rather, is that in hierarchical spaces, what is not counted as knowledge is how to interact with each other socially and as a community. And in distributed forms of knowledge, we're not only then talking about the actual things that we're learning, but how to talk to each other, how to critique, how to disseminate, how to, in respectful but challenging ways, be in relation with each other in learning environments. So what I would like more commentary on is the expansive notion of what is knowledge, how much counts as knowledge, you know, yeah.
Okay.
Good afternoon.
Good evening.
My name is Tsunisa Kosa. And Prof, I'd just like you to share with us your ideas on Fanon's tragic violence. Yes, if you could just share with us a bit what your thinking is around that.
But this is mere speculation as far as I'm concerned.
Please, your name.
If let's take now Fanon was in South Africa taking cognizance of the social, the colonial. That's the word. Just so give me the colonial. System and the transformation we have undergone to the period to date. How would you view, in your opinion, how do you think Frantz Fanon would give an insight to that situation? It's just a mere speculating. With the ideas that we have and with the mind we have of what type of thoughts were in his mind. From a political perspective.
Please say your name.
Saul Roshilo.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
It's over there.
Greetings, wonderful people. How are you all feeling right now? Okay. To cut the long story short, I've learned a lot from you. I've learned a lot from the other people that spoke before you, and I learned a lot from the people that asked the questions and exercising our brain muscles. But all I wanted to announce is that the center of the universe is right there next to you. So if whoever wants to hear, it's available right now. You will show them. Please answer the questions.
I guess I'm asked to show this. Okay. Center of the universe. Okay. Yes, back there.
Hello, my name is Maud. I work as a theatre maker, and I am not very good at reading academic things. I don't love it. I need to do practical things with my body to make sense of the world. And I wonder, my question is really to ask for more books, I guess, but in a way I wonder if you have any recommendations for the kind of examples of work that has been made artistically or architecturally or whatever, that speak to a practical application of what, or at least some of what Fanon speaks about in his writing.
Well, I think I'll start with that last one first. Okay? You can probably guess from the things I said about Fanon and even the stuff that I talk about, that I share with him the view that we shouldn't separate the question of theory and practice. And I did an interview this morning about schools and learning, and I should tell you that I don't work from the view that there are books, articles that represent, the sources of learning, and then there are other things in the world that we do practically. Everything is a source of learning. And these ideas can be explored not only through the medium of printed material and scholarly material, but it's already there in many ways in music, in theater, it is there, and the theory is rich in many ways, because if we're going to break down, you know that point where I said that we were being squeezed into a narrow way of thinking? We need to free ourselves of that and develop a different way of thinking and experiencing what it is to be reflective. This is one of the reasons why, for instance, as we know, not all music is particularly good or informative, but there's brilliant stuff out there. You know, it's very funny. I remember I was writing a piece recently where I talked about it this morning. There are many, I'll just pick it because it's popular now. I do a lot from jazz, but what's popular now is hip hop, and you know, Most Def's Black in Both Sides is a politically brilliant album. Although people make a lot about Kendrick Lamar's Damned, I don't think that's a very good album. I think To Pimp a Butterfly is a brilliant album. I just have to be frank with you. But in addition to that, it's not only, you know, within a framework like those, but you look at what great artists in this country were saying. A lot of us don't realize there was a time if you would go to any artist's home, I used to hang out with old jazz musicians. Their house was full of books, but not only books, sculpting, painting. They went, you know, they went to plays. What we need to understand is that we have the capacity to learn in a richer way than what is handed to us. Ontology, Heidegger basically says you're not thinking unless you think about being. You got it? But the problem with that is, first of all, what he has done is to fetishize being as the subject of thought. In effect, he's want to say if you're thinking about other things or other relationships, it's not thinking, which is flawed. And it's flawed because, as Nishitani pointed out, and Fanon tends to do it aphoristically, the problem with being is that being covers over reality. I know it's hard for us to realize this, but reality includes being and is beyond being. Okay? Now, our capacity to realize being and to think beyond being, that beyond being is what makes our existence a stand out from being. In fact, that's what the word existence means, to stand out. And that ability to transcend being, this is a more, I don't want to say metaphysical point because that reinscribes being. It is what connects us with freedom. You see? And this, but this, the critique that Nishitani had, and it's the critique that Fanon has, is that the fetishizing of being attempts actually to put reality into being, which is in effect an effort to colonize reality. Existence. Correct. Because reality, existence, reaches for reality beyond being. You see? Now if you think about the way colonialism works, I love to do it this way, right? Picture reality can move like this, right? You can feel that? Colonialism says, cut it out. This is rational. You see what I'm getting at? But in fact, music, and in fact, some people say this is the only way to do music. Or a waltz. But music can be done not only in this way, this is 6, it can be done in 7, it can be done in 11, it can be done in 23. So you all don't even realize, because if you look at a lot of pre-colonial African music or Asian music, people did not lock themselves in a small set of meters through which to dance. And you notice when I did it, it was funky. You could dance to it. Well, that's what's been happening to a lot of thinking. We've been closing our thinking into a small box. And that closing of thinking into a small box is connected to an effort to put the human being into a small box. And that small box is connected to the idea of thinking of a human being as a thing. You see? You could put things into boxes, contain them in, you see what I'm saying? And this is a conception of the human being that was very suitable for a system of containment and predictability. And a system of containment and predictability is what affected human institutions such as markets. You know, if you don't think about capitalism, think about markets the way markets have been in Africa and South America and Asia and Australia for more than 100,000 years. In the past, you know what people went to the market for? A lot of times what you needed to stay alive, you already had in your community. The reason you went to a market was to meet other people. And markets, and interestingly enough, pre-colonial markets were predominantly run by women, what today we'll call women. Because I have to say today we call women because, as Orunka Oyumi points out, and by many others, what we call woman or man is very different from the way many people used to see themselves. But if we look at them historically, people go to the market not to say I'm going to make a profit. They went to the market to exchange things. For instance, news. We didn't used to have television, radio, and internet, and newspapers. News is what you got from somebody who went to the market and told you what people from another place who went to the market, what was going on with them. And in Euromodernity, a form of technological thinking emerged that said the problem with those markets is they're too human. We need to make them less human, and so the measurement became not the humanizing capacity of market relations. Even in South Africa right now, you know, you go to the supermarkets, you have trades, but there are still markets that are set up where people go and hang out. And even today, it's deep in our consciousness because even in malls, most people may buy something, but they just walk around all the time, all right? And so what that already tells you, the argument was you need to have a different measuring tool, and that became profitability, which means you have a subject for the market, and the subject for the market became the notion of a reductive, rational, individual subject who only thinks about its self-interest. And once you have that, you have the notion of non-relational, non-dialectical, closed individual notion of being. You see? And that effect, and that being is ripe for commodification by the market. Commodification means you turn it into something that you can sell. You got it? And so the market then became deified and began to be treated like a god. You notice when people talk about market, they say, well, the market is down today, the market is up. But let the market make the decision. How the hell does a market make a decision? It's people making decisions. But here's the thing. The more alienated you are from the idea of you as decision makers, then there is an abstract market over you like a god. And that means you now move away from what education historically was for. This is getting to your question, which was actually, in all societies, if you look in the history of education, which means to draw out, to grow, education was about cultivating your humanity. To make a living required something else, right? But the commodification of education means you have to, just as with the market, turn away from markets to the market, turn away from education to certification. And certification as something you can sell, the commodity of certification, made education a liability in institutions of so-called learning. And because of that, the commodification of education, we could call it the colonization of education, but the problem is many people don't think about what colonization really means these days, because there are different types of colonization. This type of colonization is commodification. This is why when people leap too quickly to say, well, capitalism does it, they don't explain why or how. This is why or how. It's to say to you that if you're in a space, you're in that space of what's called learning, not to learn, but you're only there to get a job. So it brings in the threat of unemployment as a technology of subjugation and control. Now here's the thing. This is the lie. James Boggs said it brilliantly in a book called American Revolution. And here's what he points out. Every one of you know this. We live in a world of surplus. We live in a world where we throw away food to keep the price of food up. We live in a world where we waste energy when we could share it. We go down the long list. We have surplus. You know what that means? It means you don't have to put that much labor into the production of needs. Now, what does this tell you then? Well, it tells you several things. But the basic thing it tells you is the reason most people, right, are unemployed is precisely because we live in a system that is designed for unemployment. In other words, what gets you a job actually isn't education. What gets you a job is a healthy economy committed to the welfare of the people. You see what I'm getting at? Because if it's committed to the welfare of the people, then you are valuable, period. It's not about whether you have this job or that job. And it transforms the meaning of labor and work. You see? Education is around the cultivation of freedom and your relations in the world, dignity and citizenship. But that requires a different philosophical anthropology, a different understanding of what it means to be a human being. That other model, which is designed for capitalism, says, I am who I am selfishly by myself. Forget the rest of you all. However, that's not, but the other model, which is the possibility model, means the human being is always that which is reaching for something other than itself, which means the human being is relational. And once you're relational, you know what that means? It means every relationship you enter is the production of another relationship. You see what I'm getting at? So that means education is the production of the ongoing relationships of freedom. And this is crucial. Let me put it down more down to earth now. In the liberal model that's connected to capitalism, where you're a thing, then here's something people talk about in the country right now, diversity. Diversity means you take a thing that is not in a space and you put it in the space, and now the space is diverse. But here's the problem. Let's pick women as a category. If you have historically male spaces, they were historically male spaces because their grammar, their structure is designed to keep women out. So that means if you want to keep those structures in place and put a woman in, you're literally simply putting her in a relationship where she is, in a nutshell, a man who's anatomically female. In other words, and it's the same applies to race. If it's an historic space that's premised on the exclusion of blacks, then blacks can only come in as whites in black skin. You see what I'm getting at? But if you understand human beings as relationships, then you have to say the real problem was that construction of a relationship premised upon the exclusion of other relationships. You know what that means? It means that if you try to bring someone in, that person as a relationship has to change those relationships. So if I go back to women as an example, if you try to put women in, women are not just a floating category. Race is not just a floating category. Have you ever seen a race walking? Or a gender walking? I could go down the list. If you see those as relationships, then they're related to other relationships. Well, what is one of the historical relationships of misogyny and sexism? And it is, in a nutshell, the sexualization of females. So that means if you put a female in, what, because she's a relationship, is going to come with her is the history of sexualization. Which is why today, workplaces are dealing with a sexualization problem. It's also why other things come in with females, such as sexual orientation equality, such as trans equality. They're not, if we think of them as a list, we have it wrong. That's that old being mentality. If we look at it as dialectical relationships, there's no way we can try to transform the society without its transforming our understanding, which means it transcends being, okay? So with the education example, once you understand that certification is the commodification model, that's why it needs those checklist hierarchies, because it's not committed to education in the first place. But if you have the relational model, then you understand that actually there's a rich array of things to learn. In fact, I created a school in New York in the 80s where the students and I designed the curriculum. And what's interesting is that they were learning very quickly beyond the secondary school level, at the level of content, because in our designing the curriculum, we had to explain why we were putting things into the curriculum. Most of you study things but don't ever have a conversation of why you're studying it. Just like when I talk about the professor and student, I'm trying to get them to think about why are they students? Why am I a professor? Well, it's the same thing with your courses. Same thing with all of it. I never teach a course without a conversation. Why the hell take this course? Why? Why is math important? If you just give students math, but if they reflect upon why they need to learn how to do certain things, they may actually introduce a conception of how to study math that's higher than the textbooks have been designed to teach us. And this, once we begin to understand these considerations, they come back to that point about the political. So if we come back to the question of Fanon, Fanon would be very disappointed with the world today. Yeah. And he would be disappointed because here's something about Fanon, at least I've observed, that many of you may not realize. The more negative part of his thought, the depths of his soul, in his heart, he wanted to be wrong. If you really love humanity and you see humanity on a negative course, you pray that you are wrong. And his analysis connects to what we were just saying, because if you look at the being's mentality, then in the initial stage of independence or anti-apartheid or you name it, right? The problem is that many of the agents at that moment of social change are not actually interested in revolution. They're simply interested in replacing the current set of dominators. Do you see what I'm getting at? And that's why Fanon pointed out in Nigeria, in Ghana, he was looking at these situations in Kenya, and all over the world, that the problem was the replacement of the colonial bourgeoisie with a post-colonial, he called them lumpen bourgeoisie. And what he meant by that is they're people whose power was not linked to the infrastructural transformation of the conditions of the people, but linked to being mediators between the former colonizers and the present, right? It's not de facto political power. It was instead simply the negotiation of the ongoing logic of colonialism. And so it means that the subsequent generations, in other words, to put it differently, it's not an example of the radical love I talked about. It's an example of the narcissistic love, right? And the colonizer can now look and say, we've done a good job, they're like us. But Fanon remember, even though he had that dire criticism, Fanon would look at the present and say, the moment we forget that as existence, as human beings, we are agents of possibility, that's when we're in trouble. So although the circumstances are dire, what Fanon would say is we must remember that the problems, short of an asteroid just landing into the planet, are human-created problems. And as human-created problems, they require human solutions. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
But here's the crucial point. The mistake people make is to lock that critique in the logic of pessimism and optimism. Both, Fanon would argue, and he did in fact argue, are naive. They're naive because they presuppose you cannot act without forecast. But what Fanon pointed out is that the essential issue of political action isn't about forecast. It isn't about pessimism or optimism. The issue for political action, in a nutshell, is about commitment. We should be talking more about what political commitment is. A teacher does not know what will happen when you meet. That's why I want to talk about the teacher example. The teacher has to come before you and work with you through commitment to your capacity to learn. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. And in a democratic society, the commitment means that what you produce through that understanding could be something that is not a repetition or reproduction of the present. But if you understand commitment means it's not about you. It's about the love that's premised on the ongoing project of building human freedom. Then what emerges is becomes something where the real question is not to say, did I do it right? The real question is for the other generation to say, thank God you acted.
Yeah.
That's a good place to start. I think we're out of
we are out of time,
but don't worry, I'm hanging out, so we can.
We're out of time.
Oh, yes.
Okay, very quick. You've got 30 seconds. I'm counting.
Sure.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Prof, especially for your contribution in African existential phenomenology, and also for the book that you write, What Fanon Said. It is a good book, especially for someone who wants to know the life for Fanon. Now, I just want to link the why that you were telling us, because now why we are failing is because we don't ask why in what we are doing. So we don't have a space of where why can be practiced. And if I link this also to the last phrase of Black Skin White Mask of Fanon, he said, oh God, make me a man who always question. So, what we are lacking now, I think, is the why that we're supposed to practice is blocked in another way. So another thing that I want to ask you is why Fanon also was someone who was self-criticizing himself. I mean, like, if you consider, like, that time he was in the train and then said, oh, now it seems like I'm a problem. And also why he was also criticizing two other authors. Thank you.
Our elder would like to say, Saul, our elder would like to say one thing.
I'm 90 years old. I was born on the 12th of December 1930, and I've seen it all. What has cleared my misconception about about some of the ideas that were lurking at the back of my mind, I just wanted to know something. If Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre, who wrote on being and nothingness, were contemporaries of Frantz Fanon, because in what I read, I find some similarities of what his views were in the book. If you could clear me on that one. Thank you.
Thank you. Because we're out of time, I'm just going to be very short. The short point is, it's a mistake to read Fanon's writings, any of them, in isolation, without the ongoing relationship to not only other works, but also other interlocutors. In Black Skin, White Mask, he ended with the question to his body, and I wrote a piece called, believe it or not, a piece on Fanon and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And if you all, it's open access, so if you want to read it, just write me and I'll send you it. The short version of what I argued is that Mary Shelley was absolutely brilliant. And at the age of 19, when her book came out, what she summarized really a prototypical post-colonial critique that you find also in Black Skin, White Mask. And that is, it connects to the stuff I said about love, is what is the relationship of the created to the creator? Okay? And as you know, in Frankenstein, that's the name of Victor Frankenstein, which means the victory of freedom, by the way. The creature was rejected by the creator. And if you think about colonialism wanted to have in the global south reflections of Europe, okay? But at the same time, the problem is this was being imposed on human beings who had their own views of the world, and so that was rejected the way the creature was rejected, as an abomination. Now, the mistake the creature made in Frankenstein, and Fanon is bringing that out, the same problem in Black Skin, White Mask, is that he ran around, kept asking the master to create for him a female creature to give him a future. You see what I'm saying? In other words, he was depending on the master's logic as the sole source of creativity. And that's why Fanon was asking if in his body, at the end of Black Skin, White Mask, there was possibility. But in The Damned of the Earth, Fanon had a different answer, because Fanon realized the mistake of Black Skin, White Mask. The mistake is not to run and keep asking, why don't you make me have a future to be like you? The real response is for me to get off my ass and build my future. To move from the lowercase black and to what Biko, in a capital black, called Black consciousness, not as a fetishized consciousness, but as a possibility. And that means then you have a new way of thinking what it is to be modern. Because to be modern is not to be a European. That's just European modern. To be modern is to take responsibility for the building of your future. You see? So that means you gotta ask, say in South Africa, not How can South Africa's future be like Europe's or like North America? You have to ask in Africa, what is a meaningful future for people who are committed to the values of what it is to live in an African society? And those values will have a different understanding of what is to be, not only to be the future, but what others can learn, or learning with others, because you see, the future is already a future that's involved in living on a very different planet. We have the technological and the numerical resources to deal with different problems than our ancestors. So that means that there's no way any group of people are going to think the future without understanding our relationship with all groups of people. And that's going to be a different kind of people. You see?
Thank you very much to Prof. Lewis Gordon. Yeah, what a rich conversation. Yeah, we are better for it. And thank you to, I've been asked to just do a quick vote of thanks. Thank you so much to all of you who came and who have shared ideas and thoughts and engaged with the work presented today. I mean, you can have as many talks as you want, but they are made more enriching by the people who come here and engage with us. So thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to come here. And yeah, I think for me, I'm listening to all of this, thinking about the fact that this is the 200th anniversary of the settlers' arrival. I'm thinking about it in relation to the 110th anniversary of the founding of the Union of South Africa, and thinking about how far we've progressed as a people, given those significant moments in history that have shifted a lot of who we are and have shifted who we could have been if it wasn't for these significant dates. And I think specifically also, just to sum up what has been said, of the words of the poet uMachizama nonzizimqwetho asinakuthula umhlaba ubolile. And I think that's really what this conversation is about. We cannot keep quiet when these things, I think Fanon responds to that with his work. We cannot be silent when the state of the world is what it is, and also to sort of expand uMachizama. We cannot just not act. And that's why there are people like Abahlali who continuously act and push back against this complacency, and also take into practice the words of Fanon, the work of Biko, the work of so many other philosophers and thinkers, while also charting thought as well. We are doing that, we are working, and we are also thinking, because we too are originators, and that's what we've learned in this room today. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you to the Forge for the space. Thank you to Mwelela and the team for organizing this, and we hope for more spaces like this. We hope for analyses on Fanon from a feminist perspective, from a young person's perspective, from queer people's perspective, from trans women's perspective. I look forward to coming and seeing a 3-day workshop of people from various walks of life dealing with who Fanon is and the legacy and the work that continues to this day. Thank you very much.
Tomorrow morning.